At this time, I want to introduce our special guest tonight. I'm super excited. I actually met Dr. Seabury through Team RWB. He's a fellow cyclist and lover of nature. And that's how we became connected. But I am fascinated by his work. Dr. Josh Seabury is an associate professor in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at the University of Northern Iowa. He received his BS in chemistry from the University of Kansas in 2006 and received his PhD in physical chemistry in 2011 from Purdue. From 2011 to 13, Dr. Seabury worked as a postdoctoral fellow at NASA, Goddard, Dr. Seabury work at the University of Iowa, where focused in the fields of astrobiology and astrochemistry with the characterization of primordial environments. I'm sure he's going to tell us exactly what that means, but it sounds really geeky and cool all at the same time, right? So since 2019, Dr. Seabury has been bringing teams of undergraduate students to Wind Cave National Park to explore how the cave can be used to better understand environments on other planets and the moons in the solar system. And I've followed some of this in our exploits as well as on his Facebook, watching some of the cool pictures and things that they're doing. Dr. Seabury is the lead investigator of UNI's BASE program awarded by the NASA Iowa Space Grant Consortium entitled Wind Cave as Terrestrial Analog for Possible Exobiological Environments Off Earth. I told you this is going to be super interesting and super geeky. The project is focused on how wind caves can serve as a model system for the icy moons of the solar system and has provided unique research opportunities for over 50 students. The students choose to focus on the science and mystery of the wind caves' zebra calcites. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Seabury to our group tonight. And he's going to share his research and how it impacts our environment and what we can do. Josh, thanks.
Well, thank you for having me. The other person who's here tonight who didn't introduce herself is one of my students, Jackie Hagan. She started the project as a sophomore after a bit of arm twisting, and has totally changed her outlook on graduate school. She's actually just coming back from presenting some of this at the National Geological Society meeting on Monday. So she and I are going to kind of tag team a little bit on some of this talk stuff, because it's always fun to hear the students talk about their own work. All right, so let's see. I'm going to share my PowerPoint. Share. And apparently I have to turn on the security allowances. 1 second here. All right, it's going to make me reopen Zoom. I will be back in a second.
We'll be right here waiting. All right, we can see your slides. We're good to go.
Right. Good. All right, let's get my advancer here. All right, I think I'm in good shape now. All right, so this is kind of a conglomeration of work. Kella kind of briefly mentioned some of this is at Wind Cave. Some of this is also here in Iowa, and just in the last couple of weeks, we started expanding up into one of the Minnesota caves to start working up there. Some of the caves we can only get into certain times of the year. because of conservation type issues. So like the Minnesota cave, Sunday is the last day we get to go to the Minnesota cave because we're trying to keep the bat population as healthy as possible. We're just kind of gonna dive in. The shorthand title for what we do is astrobiology. And I've kind of got this QR code here for anyone who's interested. We do have our own YouTube channel that has undergraduate students that film us doing our work, so people can kind of follow along with what we're up to. So kind of a who we are to kind of kick things off. I am one person and Jackie is one student. The team is considerably larger than that, and this is definitely not a one-man show here by any means. I mean, just even looking at the list of diversity in terms of departments, we've got athletic trainers, several biologists, many people here in my own department of chemistry and biochemistry. I already mentioned we've got a communication and media team, so they have their own professor. We have earth sciences involved, exercise psychology, physiology involved, some geography involved. Note that's geography, not geology. We're actually doing some GIS work with big data. We also have several NASA collaborators who are working with us, along with just several departments as a whole who chip in: technology, School of Music, the museum here on campus, then our College of Humanities, Arts, and Sciences, the UNI Foundation, multiple private donors, and then NASA in its various shapes and forms, and the National Park Service. So this is a very kind of large conglomeration team that we've kind of pulled together over the last only 3 years. For as much as we do, it's only been 3 years, and I have to keep reminding myself of this. We only really got into the science aspects of this in 2020. The students are rich and varied. So this is kind of it's always fun to show just how many people help on the student side of things. As a university professor at an institution that only works with undergraduate students, every single student I have is in the midst of trying to decide what their career is going to be. And for me, I had a couple of unique opportunities in undergrad that kind of got me where I am now. And I've kind of made it one of my goals to provide as many unique opportunities for students to explore what could potentially be a career for them. So this is just the Wind Cave teams since 2019. The first one was not a cave science team. It was just a regular class of students who were going on a field trip. And then very quickly after that field trip, we wrote this grant and it became hardcore science. And so all of these students they volunteered for the group, but I wound up having enough money that I could pay them to be research assistants. So they actually can make a small living in their undergrad days. But this is just the Wind Cave team. I mentioned we do other caves as well. So here's the cold water side of things. And so it's just kind of we've got a very large number of students who are constantly helping with this work and constantly trying to drive us to be done. And you can already see Jackie has shown up in many of these pictures across the last year and a half. These pictures are a little small, but she's in there in several of them. Jackie's one of those that kind of got bit by the cave bug, as we put it. So what is it that we're actually doing? I've shown you the team over the last few years. What we're actually doing, our study itself is a study of life at the most extreme limits that life is known to survive. The idea is life as we know it here on Earth comes with very unique properties. It needs an energy source, whether it's solar or geothermal. And even we rely on solar as humans because we eat plants or we eat animals. So that's indirect solar energy. All life is carbon-based. It's composed of nucleic acids, which make up DNA. It's composed of amino acids, which make up the proteins that build your body cells. and life would not flourish without water. So there's the common ingredients for life as we know it. If any one of those cycles is interrupted, the carbon flow, the energy flow, or the water flow, then life fails. Now we can interrupt it to a point of extreme, and that's where this definition of extremophile comes in, where one or more of these types of environments are pushed to the extreme limit where they may or may not be able to survive. But if we want to talk about life as we don't know it, or life that we might find elsewhere in the solar system or the universe, all the models can suggest right now is it needs to have some sort of an energy source. It needs to be able to have a high energy source that then it uses the energy from that source to drive its life processes. We can speculate that it might be carbon-based. It might be, we know Star Trek like to talk about silicon-based life forms. So there's a lot of speculations on the shape of life and what it might be made out of. But we know it must have an energy source of some sort. And so the idea is by using caves, or this whole question, why caves, is we want to look at an environment where energy is a limiting factor. In caves, in the deep caves of the Earth, we are typically far away from, in many of them, geothermal sources. We are far away from solar sources. So we have a very, very weak energy line to get to life. We also have very poor nutrient bases typically. And so the idea behind the caves is we're trying to better understand or find models for those moons and other habitats in the solar system. Where might life be flourishing that we don't know about at this point? So the kind of the classic icy moons of the solar system would be Enceladus and Europa, the big ice-shrouded moons that were discovered during the Voyager missions. We think that they possibly have all kinds of interesting geo activity similar to Earth's crust. We've got underground water reservoirs. We've got upwellings of crust, of solid ice crust. We've got a liquid ocean, much like we have our liquid mantle. In many cases, we would expect to see hydrothermal activity from the tidal squeezing and pushing of the gravity wells of these moons. So we've got a very highly energetic type system. And we know from several of the satellite flybys that we actually do have the correct ingredients for life as we know it. We've detected carbon, we've detected methane, we've detected ammonia, so just the common ingredients that we know about for life. The other moon of the solar system we're investigating is Titan. Now, Titan is not often known about, but it is the largest moon of Saturn, and it's shrouded in a very, very thick atmosphere. So like Earth's atmosphere, which is 50 kilometers of oxygen and nitrogen, so it's that thin layer around us. There's all those famous pictures from space that show just how thin the atmosphere is and how little there is keeping us safe. You go out to Titan, that atmosphere is 2,000 kilometers thick, and it's full of nitrogen and methane. So it's a very different look to what Earth is like. But that methane acts like water. It goes into a liquid cycle, it creates rivers, it creates lakes, and it weathers away, we think, the surface of Titan, producing caves that might be Earth-like. And kind of our final analog, the classic where might life be analog? Mars. Everybody likes to think about little green men on Mars. Chances are there might be life hidden somewhere in a nook and cranny, but it's not going to be little green men. It's going to be little teeny tiny bacteria of some sort. What we do know about Mars is in the right areas of Mars where the rovers have landed and where the mapping has been done by satellite, we do see evidence of a mineral, and I've got an example here on my video camera of calcite. And so you can see calcite are these nice, big, beautiful crystalline structures when the background blur doesn't blur. Calcite is a water-formed mineral. So that's one of the clues we're using within all of these environments. If we can find evidence of minerals that were formed by water and can only be formed by water, then that means there must have been water there. And just because we don't see it there now doesn't mean it can't be somewhere else. It could have easily moved somewhere else and moved underground. So this is really what an astrobiologist does, or what astrobiology is about. Astrobiology here on Earth, as a field astrobiologist, we're trying to find the environments here on Earth that best represent the environments of the solar system. It's obviously very expensive to get out to the moons. It could take 10, 20 years to create a field mission that gets us out to Europa or Titan. So an astrobiologist is going to go find that spot here on Earth that looks like one of those moons, behaves like one of those moons, and we're going to study that area as thoroughly as possible. So when those satellites and the spacecrafts are launched, we're going to be able to get the best data possible from that area of the solar system and try really hard not to waste any of that mission money that goes out that way. This has the side benefit that that's going to give us a really, really good understanding of our Earth. And every single field campaign I've ever heard about from astrobiologists, it just continues to show just how delicate and how precious life is on Earth and how much we really need to be protecting it. Many of the caves that we've looked at over the years, or astrobiologists have, are very much in danger of pollutants. We've got the white-nosed bat fungus that cavers are. I do have the chat open, so I did see the question for those of you in the chat. So I did. So we do see that these caves, when they're under threat, and we're trying to actively protect these caves while we're trying to study them as well. So there is this side benefit that as we're treating Earth to learn about the solar system, we're actively taking those steps to try to protect these super, super delicate ecosystems. So here on Earth, the caves work a lot like the solar system caves and what we think is happening. In the moons, we have these water and this energy, and we have the potential for life down in the middle. In the caves here on Earth, we have water from rain, we have water from the water table, we have the plants on the surface creating very difficult to use organic nutrients. This is one of those big things for farmers. It's like, what do you do with all that organic matter that cannot be used by humans? We cannot eat a corn stalk. And so there's all this question about, can we make it into biofuels? Can we produce ethanol from it? How do we break down the plant matter that we can't use in a good way, or in some cases in a commercial way? Well, this leftover residue from the plants when they die back in the fall works its way down into the caves through the groundwater. And that's the only food that the extreme bacteria at the bottom of these caves get to eat. They get to eat whatever the plants have decided is decomposition that can just go down into the water stream and become food later on. We oftentimes call this amorphous carbon, or carbon that is hugely complex, where you and I could not eat it and survive. And there's very few organisms that could eat it and survive. So the caves themselves are very rich and varied. Just to kind of look at what a cave map might look like from the surface. So this is our bird's eye view. We've got Wind Cave on the right, I guess the left. I'm used to talking on a PowerPoint screen with the PowerPoint behind me. So we've got Wind Cave here on the black background and Coldwater Cave here on the white background. On this scale, they don't look that much difference in size, but they are quite different. Wind Cave in the black has 162 miles worth of cavern space that have been mapped, and that number is continually increasing every year. Coldwater Cave, which is our river cave, has 17.2 miles, and that number hasn't changed in 20-some years and is unlikely to change. But to actually see these as the bird would see, so imagine you're in an airplane with X-ray vision looking from the ground, this is what the relative sizes of the caves look like. So even though Wind Cave has 162 miles worth of cave, it's in a smaller surface area than Coldwater Cave. So this is what we call spaghettification. That means these are highly complex environments that would be very easy to get lost and turned around in if you don't know where you're going, what you're doing. That also means there's a lot of potential pathways for that surface water to work its way down into the ground and feed the bacteria. So what do we have to do to get ready for the cave? So it's not just a cave science story. It's also about how do I get my students there and back, preferably in one piece each student. I don't like to leave parts of students behind. So I have probably the most fit students on campus, barring student athletes. But as far as science students go, I probably have the most fit students you can get. Jackie has been extremely good this year. She's actually got a cohort that has a workout worksheet pulled together that has do this much kind of cardio, this type of strength training, and they've got some good-hearted competition going for who can actually follow the routine the most this semester before our Christmas trip. And you can see we even practice at home here at the top of the video. It's a squeeze box, so we can actually see how small can we get so that we make sure we can make it to the cave where we're supposed to be. And these are for the most tiniest spots in the cave. We really don't go into those areas unless there's absolutely no other way to get to that area. Especially Wind Cave has been well mapped enough that we can bypass a lot of the tiny areas sometimes. We have a large stockpile of gear. I jokingly laugh that when you walk into my chemistry lab, it's not all of the chemical bench tops with the glassware all set out nice and pretty and beakers of mixing water. You walk into my lab and it looks like I own a scuba shop. I've got a rack of 25 wetsuits, a rack of helmets, tubs of booties, and bags hanging up all over the place and tons of knee pads. And that's the first thing you walk into. Behind that is the glove box with all the chemical reagents and stuff like that. So you walk in and you just don't feel like you're in a chemistry lab. And that's because I've got to make sure that my students are protected, but that the gear also is clean and it's not contaminating where we're going. Our biggest worry is that we're going to drag something into the cave environment that's going to cross-contaminate the life there and potentially destroy the entire site. And so we really, really work hard on making sure we're wearing clean gear. We wear gear specific to each cave. I have a set of gear I use for Wind Cave. I have a set of gear that I use for Coldwater Cave. It does help that one is a cold river for a wetsuit and one I can cave in t-shirts and boots. So there's really not a lot of use for having the same gear in both caves. And we've got to make sure that we can survive down there ourselves. We are not extremophile bacteria. We cannot survive on whatever comes down from the surface. So whenever we go into the cave, we have to take our entire science package, which would be all of this stuff to the left side of this picture or to the right side of the below picture. But we also need to take all the food we need for the trip, a good chunk of the water we're going to need, and we need to be able to carry out any waste that we might generate. We really go by a no trace left behind. We go into the cave, we do our science, but every crumb of food, every drop of urine, anything that we would do waste in the cave, we need to bring back out. If you eat a granola bar and a couple of crumbs fall off by your boot, you'd better pick that up and take that out of the cave because that's actually a really bad contamination source. Our cave trips can last anywhere between 2 hours to my record currently at 11 and a half hours. We've been training and working that hopefully here in the near future, we'll be spending up to 3 days in the cave at some of the far reaches. And actually we'll have to sleep at one of the base camps that they have. So it's very much an iterative process of pushing and training and pushing and training. I'm only 3 years into this type of science, and I still have a long ways to go to get to where I want to be. The cave itself, just to kind of give you an idea of the conditions, moderate air temperatures in the 50s. Cold water cave is aptly named cold water because, especially in midwinter and early spring, the water drops down into the 30s. Hence the wetsuits. It can be quite bone-chillingly cold down there. It can have low clearance. It can have tight quarters, but you can also have huge open galleries that stretch for a half a mile and that you can turn on your light as bright as you want and you'll never see the far end. So this is just kind of some examples of what it looks like while we're trying to get to our sample sites. We can have itty bitty tiny little holes like the snake pit with Jackie sticking her head out here. But that little tiny hole might open up into a giant room that you can't see the far end of. So it's one of those wonderful things. That's what drives cavers or the cavers as opposed to the cave scientists. We're going to go and try to actually get data. The cavers are always hoping that that next tiny squeeze is going to be the next big chamber, the next big breakthrough. And so we really try hard to plan our routes so that we don't damage anything in the cave. To kind of give you an idea of the 166 miles of Wind Cave where we've covered some fairly large tracts of cave space. This kind of shows you where all that we've done for Wind Cave, some of the main dominant routes in the cave that are well marked so they're easy to follow. But then we've also done a smaller portion of Coldwater Cave. Coldwater Cave, we haven't done too much because upstream is flooded, so we can't get further upstream. And downstream has a very deep void area where the water's like 10 feet deep. And that's very difficult to swim back upstream against in the wrong conditions. So we're kind of limited in Coldwater Cave to what the water table does. So years of drought like this year are actually good for us to learn more about Coldwater Cave because the water level drops to something that's manageable. Now, this is where we're going to get into kind of what do we see, and especially what are we trying to protect. The biggest rule in my group is we're not taking cave formations out of the cave. We are working extremely hard to study the cave formations in their place and not damage them. These cave formations have taken thousands, if not millions of years to form. And so we really try hard to protect these caves, and we really try hard to raise awareness about protecting the caves, both from the cave aspect, but also from the water quality aspect. Wind Cave reaches the drinking water reservoir for the entire Black Hills area. So if we are protecting the cave, we're protecting the water resources underneath as well. So to kind of just show you some of the names and the definitions, the most common one we see in these caves is frostwork and popcorn. And that's an aragonite formation. It's still made out of calcium carbonate, so calcite type crystals. It's just the shape of the crystals gives us these fine needle-like details. They're very delicate, very sharp. You definitely don't want to get a splinter in your finger because you can't see it. And so you'll be sitting there with a calcium carbonate splinter in your finger until your finger finally sheds it out. We've got calcite Christmas trees. So these are also made out of that aragonite as well. It's just happened to grow up from the ground instead of out from the side. And these trees can be anywhere from 8 inches to 2 feet tall. One of the new features that we've just now discovered and started describing is we've called a calcite candlestick. It's not a Christmas tree. It's not the sharp, big, pointy sticks. It's something more nodular. It's completely hollow inside, and it sits on a hole in the rock. And this picture here where it's all lit up like a rainbow is because I found the bottom of the hole and shone my white headlamp through it, and it started glowing in a rainbow color, some sort of diffraction thing, like a rainbow in the sky. We have no idea why this is the case, so that's kind of one of the fun mysteries. It's like, we only know of this one example in the world that does this. And this was part of what Jackie presented last week at her conference, and nobody there, and these are like the top geologists in the world, have any idea what's going on. So this is great. We have some of the classic formations, flowstones, stalactites, stalagmites. These are the traditional water-made features. When you think cave, you think things hanging from the ceiling, slimy looking rocks. That's flowstone. It's a whole family of things. And then Wind Cave particularly has a very unique formation called zebra calcite, where we have these striped tan, white, dark brown type bands that look like they were laid down at the bottom of a lake, but because of where they are on the rock, there was definitely no lake there to make them. So they were made through some other geoforming process. And of course, there's water everywhere as long as you get to the right level. Wind Cave itself, we're down here at the Lake District. This is actually where they go every 6 months to test the drinking water for any heavy metal contamination, for any petroleum-based products that are making it down from the surface. This is one of the few places in the Madison Aquifer of the South Dakota region where you can sample the well water without digging out a well and pulling it up through a pipe. So you can actually sample the real water, not something that's come up through a pipe. So the EPA loves having access to this testing site. National Parks doesn't enjoy taking them down because they're not cavers, so it takes a very long time to get them there. But it's a great and valuable resource for keeping an eye on the water quality. So the in situ work follows the rule of cave lightly. We don't want to damage what we're working on. So we're going to do everything we can to try to really maintain a promising outlook. We want to preserve the cave for the generations, and we want to preserve the cave for its value as an environmental resource. So we do our water sampling. It's the one thing we take out of the cave is the water. Water is one of the few renewable resources in the cave. It's constantly dripping through. So we'll set up collectors. We'll collect a liter or two of water from here and there through the cave, and it'll be replenished within a couple of weeks. So that's one of the few things we take out of the cave because it's constantly being renewed. In the case of the river cave here in Iowa, it is a river cave. So we can sample water anywhere we want. And that would be Jackie attempting to kayak down this river cave. And you can see we've got various measuring instruments that we've got stuck in the water that we can then use in order to measure its quality, measure its pH, measure what's in the water. And because the river itself is flowing from several different tributaries, we actually get a picture of what's coming from each individual farm field in terms of waste products, ag runoff, and whatever else might be seeping through each farmer's land. So we have to treat those results very carefully because we don't want to get the landowners too upset, because we don't want them actually thinking we're just down there trying to say, no, you put bad stuff in the groundwater. It's a much bigger picture than that. But then this water is full of calcium carbonate, which CAFOs. What's a CAFO?
Confined animal feeding operation, a factory farm.
I've got a picture of the watershed.
So
No, everything out there is open field pasture. It's primarily corn crops.
Okay, so not concentrated cattle sewage lagoons.
No, there's a couple of cattle fields, but that's about it. No building livestock, so to speak. No big pig farms.
Okay, thanks.
So then if you're not familiar with calcium carbonate by name, you're familiar with what happens to your tap in your sink, that it builds up that hard water crud over days or weeks, and you get all that gunk by your sink you've got to scrape off from hard water. That's calcium carbonate. And the caves where nobody's cleaning that stuff off, that's where you get those classic features. That's where you get the flowstones and the stalagmites and the stalactites. Now, that is not only just the hard water falling out of the water, but that's also trapping the organics that are in the water. So anything that is trapped in the water, whether it's the minerals from the surface or those organics that were coming from the plant roots, is going to be trapped within that flowstone. That means, and what's fun about that is if you have a cat and you have a black light, or you have a dog and a black light, you know you can find where they may have missed the litter box or gone potty when you weren't home because it glows in the dark. The rocks do the same thing if they're full of that same types of materials. So the rocks under black light, if they have organics in them, if they have that material from the surface, also glow in the dark. And we can see it in both the water and in the flowstone itself. So we can see that the water is going to glow in the dark under black light. And then as that water dries or deposits, it's going to create glowing rocks. And we can just follow these beautiful water trails down the surface of the rock, and we can see exactly where the water has flowed, whether it's actively flowing and very, very wet. It's easy to follow water when you can see the drips. But in a drought, you're not going to see the drips. But the rock is still there, and the rock still glows even when it's dry. And so that's what we end up doing. And so we have our techniques for measuring the exact color of this glow in the dark. That's one of those key things. Every color you see that glows in the dark tells you something different about what's trapped in the rock. It tells you about the size of the molecules that are in there. These are the big molecules that were used to create tree trunks. Those are still big molecules even after they've broken down and started washing into the soil. But eventually the big ones get stuck and the smaller ones are the ones that keep moving down. And the smaller the molecules get, they start changing their colors. And so we're able to start tracing that through the rock by measuring the exact color. So we can tell you that the really big compounds get stuck near the surface and the much smaller ones are making it down to the Lake District. Jackie, you want to talk about this one?
So this is one of the locations in Wind Cave. And so basically you can compare the amount of organics in certain sections by just measuring the intensity just within that flowstone area. So that graph over there shows the different colors of flowstone, and actually the more organics that were in the area, the greater the intensity. So you can compare the amount of organics in a certain area.
Keep going. You'll know the slides.
And we can also do this with zebra calcite. So zebra calcite has these injections of that calcium-rich water with those trace species in these striations. So by shining that UV light on it, we can actually start to investigate what is trapped in the zebra calcite. So this zebra calcite is evidence of ancient water once existing in this cave system. So by using our UV light, we can kind of see long ago what was in the water and what was trapped in the water. And this is over the summer, this is just how big these cave systems are. That's kind of just a human size of it, but just massive formations that span just the length of the cave wall. And so what's interesting is that we've been able to find a variety of different colors in the cave. So as you can see, we've got kind of that purple bluish color. And then we've also got more of a light blue or like a white color, and then a gold. So this is unique because that means that each of these zebra calcites were made from different sources of ancient waters because of the material, because of the trace species trapped within.
And it's not just that we see the pinks and the blues, and each one of those, I mean, I'll go back to this graph. This is basically telling us it's a scientific spectrometer. It's basically telling us exactly what the shade is. So if you go to the paint store and it says, here's the color shade, here's that little color barcode to make this color unique. That's what the spectrometer is giving us, is it's giving us the unique color barcode for each one of these rocks. This peak over here around 600 says that we're seeing a heavy influence of the metal manganese, whereas something here towards the center is telling us we have a large content of organic material. So we're really using this as a way of discovering what is trapped in the rocks that were formed long ago, but also that flowstone, that's brand new stuff. There are layers of flowstone that were laid down during the human industrial era. So we can see the trace material that was trapped in that human industrial era. So this would be one of the possible ways we would search for life on another planet. Our life, as we'll get to it, I'll jump ahead a slide or two. So life here on Earth, this picture down here with the bright red, actually does fluoresce when you hit it with a black light. I don't suggest you do this at home, but if you ever shine a black light on yourself, your skin will glow slightly blue. I say don't do that because that's ultraviolet radiation, and ultraviolet radiation has cancer issues. So don't make yourself glow in the dark with a black light at home. That's my disclaimer. But living organisms do glow when you hit them with a black light. That's a classic trick if you're in Arizona for finding the scorpions in the desert. You turn on the black light and they light up. So that's one of the big things, one of the big techniques they're exploring for finding life out there in the solar system is, can we use our spectroscopy? Can we make things glow in the dark, hit it with the light, and then see that brilliant fluorescence? Because fluorescence is rare, but life makes molecules that do fluoresce. So that's where it becomes exciting. So that's part of what we've been doing, is we've been trying to hunt what is living in all of these different cave environments. We even lay out things here. So we've got like this tube collector here. We specifically put that tube collector at a place where the tour route, where hundreds and thousands of tourists go through every summer, just to see what people are bringing in on their feet and things like that. So we're really trying hard not to have contaminations come into the cave. So the end result is we've mapped and we've found all of these types of environments, all these rocks that glow in the dark that model different planets. We've been collecting and studying all this ancient life, all this current life as this model for trying to decode things. And we've got a whole bunch of different spin-off technologies that help us. And so we can map the DNA and we can determine exactly what's growing in the cave. We can even create analog maps. So if anybody wants to figure out, well, I want to go study Mars in this cave, well, here's a map that tells you our Mars collected sites. Where do you want to study Mars? Well, you need to follow this trail and hit this site, this site, this site, and this site. Not only that, but we're studying how humans are evolving in these caving type environments. We have astronautical studies going on. Jackie and I both wear a watch that's just mapping how we are as humans changing with respect to the environments that we work in. And kind of finally, I already mentioned we have our YouTube channel, that we have our student media team that's trying to help us get the word out. We're trying to explain the importance of public science. Why do we want to protect the caves? Why do we want to preserve these environments? Why cave softly? But especially one of my favorite videos that actually won a student Emmy Award from was about what is the value of doing public-based science and getting that message out there to others. So with that, that is the crash course in what astrobiology underground kind of is. It's a bit of this, it's a bit of that. It's a lot of different disciplines working together on a bunch of different projects. I would encourage you to, if you're interested in finding out more, our YouTube channel has, I think, 21-ish videos right now, with another 4 coming out this fall about the 2023 mission that's coming up, that we just wrapped up. And me and Jackie would like to thank you for your time tonight and invited us out. And I think we have if my clock is right, 5 minutes for questions.
Yes, we do have time for questions. And we have a question from Scott. What kind of life are you finding? Do you think it will survive in an alien environment?
So we're finding the predominant life that we find that's cave native where we're at is extreme bacteria, extreme archaeobacteria, which is an even more ancient form of life, and extreme fungus, spore-based life that spreads through the caves on the air and plants its roots. That's part of why we have to make sure any food that we drop is cleaned up, because any spore that finds human-based food is going to plant a new colony where a colony should not have been able to grow. Many of these types of species, if they encountered Enceladus or Titan, would be very much at home, which is almost shocking in some aspects. And that's why, if you followed the Cassini spacecraft several years ago, that's why they sent the spacecraft into the heart of Saturn to burn up, so that if there was any life tagging along on the spacecraft, it didn't accidentally contaminate one of these potential life-bearing moons. Other questions?
This was just fascinating, Josh. It's interesting to see all of the different types of bacteria and things that you're learning about here. But what about us as humans? Does that mean that we can survive? How can we survive in those types of environments? Because that's the ultimate goal, right? If something happens on Earth, that we have an ability to survive in other areas.
For us to be able to survive down in a cave, we'd need to actually bring our own power supply to grow our own crops. We are forever going to be visitors to the Twilight region. There's just nothing down there for us. And the more we're down there or going through all the different caves, it's like there is no energy source down there that humans are going to be able to thrive off of. We would have to, all those sci-fi bunkers with the nuclear reactors and stuff like that, that's very much what we'd have to do in order to survive in a cave if the surface world ended. For Karen and Larry, any of these extreme microbes cause diseases? Not that we've found so far. The life is so uniquely adapted to the cave environment that they don't seem to be able to get a handle on anybody coming from the cave at this point that we found. You take them out of the cave environment and they die very, very quickly. It's almost impossible to grow these as living organisms in our lab in order to study them in many cases.
Thank you.
Do I have predictions on how life will be established on another moon or planet? Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm one of those believers currently that I think we may have already established life on Mars by accident by sending dirty rovers there and dirty spacecraft. As far as human scale life, I would think we'd have to get to the moon with the Artemis program. That might be the first stepping stone that we're looking at human colonization. But there's very little doubt in my mind that we've already put life on Mars, and it's human-based and it's human bacterial-based life. But only time will tell. Nobody actually goes and looks at the rovers after they've been left behind on the soil anymore. We go to some other part of Mars, and we don't go back and look at our trash.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. Chris, are you going to give a plug for the Mississippi River Pollinator Project?
He's still there.
Is he still there? I can't